In our last video, we learned that Rory is one of the many citizens who were affected by the business closures due to the economic fallout from the pandemic. Many people all over the world have been facing a similar problem, for markets have been disrupted globally. In fact, the Philippines' gross domestic product has already contracted by 0.2% during the first quarter of this year, and is projected to fall in the -1 to 0% range according to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, or to 2% according to the Asian Development Bank's projection. It is inevitable that the economy ebbs, but the government may take on measures to minimize its damaging effects. Macroeconomics is the study of the behavior of the economy as a whole. In mainstream macroeconomics, there are three objectives pursued: high GDP, low unemployment, and price stability. One way the government plays its role in attaining these is through the management of macroeconomic policy instruments, namely fiscal and monetary policies. Fiscal policy includes taxes and government spending. For example, when the government implements tax reforms, it affects the income that we receive and the prices of goods and services in the market. Furthermore, the government also partakes in spending for construction of infrastructure or giving of financial aid. These policies affect how consumers spend, save, and invest. On the other hand, monetary policy conducted by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas controls the country's money supply, which is directly tied to economic variables. For today, we'll be focusing on the fiscal policy decisions and other measures being done by the government.
One of the major pieces of legislation passed as a response to the pandemic is RA 11469, or the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. This law provides for wide-ranging spending on social amelioration programs, or SAPs, to aid those economically afflicted by quarantine measures. Controversially, this authorizes the President to conduct budget adjustment measures to fund them. In this video, we'll be taking a look at two key SAPs: the Emergency Subsidy Program, or ESP, and the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program, as well as the measures that fund them and other government pandemic initiatives. The ESP is a general cash subsidy aimed at putting money in the hands of those negatively affected by quarantine measures. The Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, conducts this through its existing SAPs. The Assistance to Individuals in Crisis Situation, or AICS, the Livelihood Assistance Grants, or LAG, and the expanded version of the widely known Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino Program, or 4Ps. In this video, we'll focus on the first two, which are especially important in the light of the crisis and the Bayanihan Act. AICS targets families rendered economically vulnerable by the quarantine. This means a wide range of low-income families, and existing beneficiaries of the 4Ps are included: lavanderas, house helpers, public transport drivers, farmers, fisherfolk, indigenous peoples, and other vulnerable groups are all covered by this program. However, elected or appointed officials, along with GOCC and private sector employees and pension-receiving retirees, are not eligible for this aid. Beneficiaries are expected to receive 5,000 to 8,000 pesos per month for the 2 quarantine months of April and May 2020, with the exact amount depending on the prevailing minimum wage in the region. LGUs are expected to help distribute this aid, and they need to sign agreements with the DSWD along with their budget proposals. LGUs are actually required to distribute its allocation within 5 or 7 days, depending on the geographical challenges faced by some households, while the DSWD sends personnel to review and monitor the distribution operations. The ESP is also coursed through the DSWD's LAG, this time targeted at families with at least one member employed in the informal sector. The purpose of this particular program is to provide capital for new micro-enterprises or additional capital for existing ones once the declaration of community quarantine is over. Allocations are capped at 15,000 pesos per beneficiary.
To protect workers in the formal sector, the government has also started the Small Business Wage Subsidy Program, designed to allow small businesses to continue paying their employees. As essential industries like utilities and healthcare are expected to continue work, this program targets small businesses in the non-essential and quasi-essential industries like hotels and restaurants, entertainment, retail trade, and banks. Employees can receive this if they are employed in an eligible firm and have lost work for at least 2 weeks. But those already being paid for participation in a skeleton workforce or in a work-from-home arrangement aren't qualified, along with those who are receiving unemployment benefits from the SSS or have unsettled or in-process claims. Those with leaves during the whole duration of quarantine are also disqualified. Like the AICS, beneficiaries can expect 5 to 8,000 pesos depending on the prevailing regional wage rate. It is important to note that employers must retain the pre-quarantine employment status of the employees and that employees cannot resign during the duration of the subsidy period. Otherwise, the aid must be refunded. Funding of programs like this is secured by the Bayanihan Act. Section 4V of the Act allows the President to realign funds assigned to executive departments, government-owned or controlled corporations, and national government agencies, as detailed in the 2020 General Appropriations Act, commonly referred to as the budget. This entails that money allocated for projects, activities, and programs by various departments can be cancelled to shift that money towards pandemic response. Among others, prioritized in this reallocation is the Department of Health, so that it can spend on hospitals, medical equipment, and wages. Included as well are the Departments of Labor and Employment and the DSWD for their various SAPs. The scale of the SAPs is matched by the scale of budget realignments. As an example, by the 6th week after the signing into law of the Act, the DOF reported 129.45 billion pesos in dividends, fees, unutilized subsidies, and remittances from GOCCs and NGAs alone, remitting 91.63 billion pesos to the Treasury in the same period. Sources of these funds are agencies like the Philippine Ports Authority, the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, and the Manila International Airport Authority, who, in sum, contributed about 10 billion to this part of the reallocation.
Economics isn't just about taxes and large-scale spending. For example, the government has a Price Watch Corner, which monitors the prices of basic goods included in a price freeze, which is an automatic effect of the Public Health Emergency Declaration last March 8. This caused basic goods to stay at their latest prices before the emergency declaration until May 15. The website also lists all advisories from the Department of Trade and Industry and the Food and Drugs Administration. One of their notices involves workers' relevance or food supply. According to this regulation, all cargoes engaged in manufacturing food and medical supplies and trucking and port operations, groceries, and BPO companies, among others, can operate during the ECQ, provided they show the required identification. Another resolution gave similar exemptions to healthy farmers and fishermen. Meanwhile, areas under a general community quarantine, announced last April 24, are subject to less stringent rules. Consumer-wise, the Department of Agriculture says there is enough supply of rice to last through the ECQ extension. Last May 1, the Department of Transportation also released its guidelines for public transportation, allowing it to slowly reopen in GCQ areas but not in ECQ areas. Before operating, public utility vehicles like buses and jeepneys must first apply for a free special permit from the LTFRB and follow passenger reduction rules. The DOLE also released workplace guidelines for private sector workers. For example, employers must provide face masks to workers, regularly disinfect their facilities, and if feasible, provide shuttle or near-site accommodation for workers. Of course, as much as all these rules are the government's responsibility, other sectors, including large corporations and businesses, have also done their part through donations in offering free accommodation and transport services to frontliners.
As COVID-19 virtually stopped the economy, a swift and adequate response from the government is imperative to mitigate its adverse impact on our social, political, and economic systems. However, it seems that the pandemic has widened the ever-pervasive structural disparities in society, as proven by the operational backlogs and bureaucratic squabbling. The DSWD articulates that only 89.42% of the 18 million target beneficiaries in the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act have received aid a day after its May 10 deadline. The problem lies in the identification of beneficiaries, the actual distribution of necessary forms while adhering to social distancing measures, and the lack of community-based monitoring system in the LGU level. Bantay Bayan, an independent think tank that tracks COVID-relevant government response, further reports that selective distribution, lack of transparency in budget processes, and the absence of financial reports are common challenges in the LGU level that also demand quick responding. Our fiscal response, in a nutshell, is a 1.17 trillion peso four-pillar socio-economic strategy to combat the pandemic, with 830.47 billion earmarked for fiscal and monetary efforts to keep the economy afloat. The stimulus package is around 6.3% of our GDP, higher compared to lower middle-income ASEAN countries like Indonesia's 1.1% and Vietnam's 3.3%. Our country has adopted similar strategies to its neighboring countries in response to COVID-19, shifting its focus on economic recovery. The government, however, still has the utmost responsibility to spend pragmatically and equitably. The plans are there, but the actual execution is lacking. Rory is looking for a semblance of normalcy, but she has to eventually accept that nothing will ever be the same. We are to expect an extraordinary shift. The new normal.